Ed Thompson, and I'm the designer and developer of Evidentia. Today, we're going to explore how we analyze our evidence using Evidentia. This is an informal class. In our August session, we looked at how to catalog claims in Evidentia, which is how we get our information into the program. If you weren't able to join us, there is a video on that topic available at our website under training and support. Last month, we talked about, well, let me share my screen so that this makes more sense. Last month, we talked about the template manager and how you can create your own templates in Evidentia to make it easier for you to enter repeatable citations. Today, what we're going to look at is the Analyze Evidence screen. So this is the Analyze Evidence screen, and as I said before, I've chosen my ancestor Daniel Page Thompson. He's the only one with Page in my list of subjects, and we're going to analyze evidence concerning his residence, where he lived. One of the reasons I've chosen this particular one, Daniel moved from his birth home in New Hampshire to Woburn, Massachusetts. And I don't know why, and I have not been able to pin down the whens or the whys of it. There were a lot of Thompsons in Woburn, Mass, but I have not been able to make any relational connections at this time. My assumption is that if we look into his residence history, it may give us some insight into why he moved to Woburn, of all places. Maybe not why as in his motivation, but why as in why did he pick that particular city. We have lots of evidence here, as you can see. I have evidence from the 1810 U.S. Census, the 1830 U.S. Census, a book, the Vinton Memorial, which actually tells me information about a lot of my ancestors in the New England area, the 1840 Census, the 1850 Census. Unfortunately, Daniel died in 1852. More information from the 1850 Census that we'll come back and look at. Some vital records from the New England Historical Genealogical Society. That's a mouthful. AmericanAncestors.com. More vital records, and a newspaper clipping from the Boston Post that gives us a little information about Daniel as well as a posting from the 1820 U.S. Census. Now, as you can see here, the evidence, the claims are kind of all over the place in terms of their order, and someone had asked me last week how you can have these presented in the order you want them, and actually it's just a drag and drop problem. So first I'm going to click the little arrow on the left-hand side of the screen to minimize the amount of information about each claim that's being displayed. That will allow me to see more claims and do what I'm about to do. I'm going to put all the census records in order. That makes a certain amount of sense to me. I'll put the book. So what I'm doing is grabbing underneath the select classification area. You see that my cursor has changed into a plus sign with arrows. That lets me know that I can grab it. Oops. Data on the cloud is more recent than my local data. So it wants me to copy cloud data. So this is, Evidentia is trying to tell me that I've got information in Dropbox that's more up to date than the stuff I have locally, which is true. So I need to copy cloud data to local. And that allows me to sync my data between two devices. I set up this data on my laptop, and now I'm working from my main iMac, has a bigger screen. We have vital records in the Boston Post. Here way at the bottom, I have the 1820 U.S. Census. It's going to be a special case in our analysis. So I'm going to move it up to right after the 1810 census information. And I believe that is it for moving stuff around. Now, the first thing we need to do, I'm going to expand this. We need to classify our evidence. If you look at the box on the left, excuse me, about the 1810 census, you'll see about the middle of the paragraph, it says this source was viewed, the source viewed was an original record. What we've done previously, as we entered in our source citation, we categorized or classified our record as either an original record, a derived record, or an authored work. And I believe in this evidence analysis, we've got all three. We also, when we documented the information in those sources that we were interested in, we also classified the informant or the source of that information as a primary source of information, someone who had firsthand knowledge of the event, as secondary information, which is usually someone who has hearsay knowledge of the event, or as indeterminable, which usually means we don't know who provided the information, or if we know who provided the information, we don't know who, whether they had firsthand knowledge or secondhand knowledge of the facts or events they're reporting. Now, the third level of classification we do when we're looking at our genealogical records is to classify the evidence. And the evidence is when you take information and assign it to a research question. Now, if you look at the top of the white portion of the screen, you'll see that it says proof of the residence of Daniel Page Thompson. If that were to be worded as a research question, it would probably read something like, where did Daniel Page Thompson live? So that's our research question. And the information in the 18 census as it applies to that specific research question has to be classified. We classify our evidence as either direct evidence, means it tells us something directly about where Daniel Page Thompson lived. Indirect, which means if we take this information and information from another record or 2 or 3 other records and put all that information together, it can help us to answer the question, where did Daniel Page Thompson live? Or negative classification, which means the absence of information may provide a clue about where Daniel Page Thompson lived. So let's look at the 1810 U.S. Census. It says the U.S. Claims that on the 6th of August, 1810, which is the enumeration date of that particular census, the household of David Thompson included one male between 10 and 15 years of age. What kind of evidence is that? Well, it's not direct. It doesn't even mention Daniel Page Thompson. But if I take that information along with information about Daniel's birth, which I have not documented under this particular proof, I know that Daniel Page Thompson was born in 1798, excuse me, to David Thompson of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. And based on an easy calculation, that would put Daniel between 11 and 13 years of age. So I believe that this particular information is telling us that Daniel Page Thompson lived in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, in the household of David Thompson in 1810. So I'm going to classify it as indirect evidence. Now, is that strong evidence? No, it's not. We are making an inference here, and we will account for that in our analysis. But for now, it allows us, we've classified the information. Now, at this point, I could do my analysis, or I can go ahead and classify the rest of the evidence. Since part of the goal of Evidentia is that you look at all your evidence together, I'm going to go ahead and use the classification step as an opportunity to review other evidence. So the next piece of evidence that we will look at is the 1820 census. Now, in 1820, David Daniel Page Thompson would have been about 22 years of age. And there is an entry in the 1820 U.S. Census in Woburn, Massachusetts for Daniel Page Thompson. I'm sorry, for Daniel Thompson, but not Daniel Page, not Daniel P. And in that household of Daniel Thompson in Woburn, Massachusetts, there is no white male listed in the age group that you would expect our Daniel Page Thompson to live. So my conclusion based on that is that this is not our Daniel Page Thompson, and that he did not live in that specific household. Again, not a strong argument by itself, but we would classify this as negative evidence because it's the absence of information that is providing the evidence about Daniel Page Thompson's residence. And again, we'll go into that in more detail when we analyze that piece of evidence. The 1830 U.S. Census for Woburn, Massachusetts states that Daniel P. Thompson was the head of household in Woburn, Massachusetts. Okay, now we're getting at some direct information about my ancestor, Daniel Page Thompson. So we can classify this as direct evidence because it directly addresses the research question. Now, how do I know this Daniel P. is my Daniel Page Thompson? We'll address that when we do our analysis in just a moment. The 1840 U.S. Census also makes a direct claim, this time naming a D.P. Thompson as the head of household in Woburn, Massachusetts during 1840. Again, that's direct evidence. 1850 census, he appears again, and he appears with his wife, Fanny G. Richardson Thompson, and his son, Walter C. Thompson. I know from another record that Fanny G. Richardson was my great-great-great-great-grandfather's second wife. So I do feel strong that this is his census information. And again, it is direct evidence. The 1850 census states that on June 1st, 1850, Daniel P. Thompson was 51 and that he was born in New Hampshire. Okay, so I have created this is a second piece of information from that same 1850 census that we just finished with. This one telling us where he was born, the fact that he was born in New Hampshire, that helps answer the question about his residence directly. So I'm going to classify that as direct evidence. In the death record for Daniel Page Thompson, Daniel Page died at the age of 54 in 1852. Again, it tells us, well, this actually doesn't tell us anything about where he lived. This was a mistake. If I look below, there is a more direct information from that same record that tells us that Daniel P. died October 17th, 1852 in Woburn. That is direct evidence. This one that we were just looking at, however, the vital record, same vital record, I captured that he was 54 when he died in October 17th of 1852. This was a mistake on my part. I tagged this with the name Daniel Page Thompson and with the claim type of residence, and really it doesn't tell us anything. So I'm going to double click on this box, and Evidentia will take me back to the catalog claim screen, catalog information screen, where I can go down to that particular information, and this one here, and if I go to double click on that, I can take this off. It really tells us nothing about his residence. However, if I look at this record here, the second record down, says Daniel P. Thompson was born in Guilford, New Hampshire. And I did tag that as having information relevant to the birth of Daniel Page Thompson, but it also relevant to where he lived. So I missed a piece of information. This allows me to add it even while I'm doing the analysis. There's my Daniel Page. I remember to add tags. Now when I go back to my analysis screen, I have another piece of information to be classified. Again, the same vital record, but this explicitly tells me that he was born in Guilford, New Hampshire. So I classify that as direct evidence. So that's a way to show you how you can navigate between the evidence screen and the catalog information screen, so you can tweak your information as you begin to analyze your evidence. That's also helpful, for instance, if I over catalog. For instance, if I put, let's see if I can find one here. Probably don't have one here I can use. So for instance, if I had decided that this tells me that he lived in Woburn, Massachusetts, and that he was married to Fanny G. Richardson, and that he had a son, Walter C. Thompson. I could go over there and say, you know what, that's a lot of information that I really don't need on the screen about his residence. And I could come down here and I could split up this particular claim into 2 pieces of information or 3 pieces of information. The 2 being it's where he lived, the second being that he was married to Fanny G. Richardson, the third that he had a child, Walter C. Thompson. However, the reason I kept this information together, and it may make more sense if I put this all together, when I'm trying to answer the question, how do I know this is my Daniel Page Thompson in residence at this location, it helps me to know who else lived at that location. And since I know he had a spousal relationship with Fanny G, then it helps strengthen my argument that this is my Daniel Page Thompson. Additionally, if I was looking at who the parents of Walter C. Thompson were, putting the spouses together in the same claim helps me put father and mother together as well. So when you write your claims on the catalog information screen, it's more art than science. Whatever you want to do and however you want to piece together that information, you can record the information that way, and then you're always free to go back and recapture that information and edit the information. And usually you don't realize you want to do that until you get to the Analyze Evidence screen. Let's see what else we've got. So we've got direct, indirect, and negative information. The book, The Vinton Memorial, claims that Susanna and Dana Page resided in Woburn. Again, that's direct information. The Massachusetts Vital Records, death records, I already did. And then the Boston Post. So there's a article, it's actually a classified ad dated April 21st, 1843 in the April 25th edition of the Boston Post. The author of that particular classified ad was Daniel P. Thompson. And Daniel P. Thompson was authoring a debtor's notice on behalf of Thompson Hopkins Esquire against the estate of Simon Bernard. So Simon Bernard died in Woburn. He died intestate and he died in debt. And this was one of those notifications that they were required by law to post in the local and any nearby newspapers so that anyone who had a claim against the estate could have that claim recorded before the estate was settled. What I found interesting in this is that in the Boston Post, let me see if I've got that linked real quick. Going back to the identify source screen, and I'm going to look at, let's see if I can just do the word post. Yes, I can. I'm going to click on that and go to the details screen. Oh, I got to select the citation. And then I've got this linked. I linked it from my other computer. Here we go. So if you look at this, can you see the newspaper clipping? Joseph, nod your head if you can see it, because I can see you visually. Thank you. So yes, this is the article. And so what this tells me, or provides some evidence for, is that Daniel Page Thompson was still living in Woburn on April 21st, 1843, since he was posting this article on behalf of another Woburn. The interesting thing is that there's other evidence in other records that Daniel was also referred to as Esquire and referred to as a gentleman, which is somewhat of a formal title, indicating he was a person of some level of stature in that community. So since it mentioned Woburn at the top of the article and Daniel Page Thompson as the author of that article, I include it as evidence, albeit weak by itself, of Daniel Page Thompson's residence. So let me go back. Okay, so I believe we've classified all of our information, and we kind of have a quick overview of what, nope, we got one more. Oh, I haven't classified the Boston Post. So I'm going to classify this as indirect evidence, because just because Daniel is mentioned in the article and just because Woburn is mentioned in the article doesn't by itself indicate that Daniel P. Thompson was either my Daniel Page or that he was living in Woburn at the time. But indirectly, when put together with the rest of the information, it helps support that argument. So I'm going to classify this as indirect information. Okay, so we have classified all of our evidence. Now, our evidence now has a classification for the source, for the information, and for the evidence. Now it's time to begin writing our analysis. I'm going to again use this little arrow on the left-hand side of the screen to collapse the evidence boxes. And what you'll see that it will do is it will actually hide the classifications that we just did. Now, those classifications can be very important, but we do have some of the information on the screen in the classification column, and that information becomes more important when we can dispute some of these records. I don't think there's going to be a lot that we'll dispute here, however, and I can see more information on the screen if I collapse it and hide the information about the classification. If I were working on my own, I've got my screen expanded, zoomed in to high level for the sake of the recording and so that it's a little bit clearer to you watching on the internet. Otherwise, there'd probably be twice as much information on the screen that I'd be able to look at the same time. In analyzing this analysis, I can work directly. I just click on the box next to the evidence, and I can start typing here. Or I can double click on the box and I'll get a pop-up that will allow me not only to analyze the information, but I can also format it with standard formatting tools. And at the top of the edit box, it repeats the evidence. So we look at this and it tells me, hold on a second, what happened to the 1810 census? Okay. This record got put at the top, which actually makes sense, because not in terms of the order of things in his life, but in the order of where he lived, it does make sense. What am I going to say about this? This record provides evidence that Daniel was born in Guilford, New Hampshire. Now, I'm going to provide some additional information from other proofs. Now, that's not common knowledge. So who's going to take my word for that? There's something you can do that is kind of infrequently used feature. If you look at this double cross at the end of the toolbar, I can insert a reference citation. Let's click on it and see what it provides me. So here I can add a new citation title, citation listing, and citation notes, not that are providing direct evidence, but that are backing up other pieces of information in this record that are not common knowledge. Or I can select from any other records that are in the database, or I can actually select from other proofs that I've done. So these are things that I've done a proof on, including the birth of David Page Thompson. I clicked on it, and Evidentia actually created a citation listing for my proof about Daniel Page Thompson's birth. I'm going to select Done. Did that not do what I wanted it to do? Let me try that again. I'm going to select Insert. Thank you. And you'll see that it inserted this double cross here. And if I hover over that cross, you'll see that it shows me my citation. I'm actually going to delete that and put it in a better place here at the end of this record. Sorry, back up here. Birth of Daniel Page Thompson. Got to remember to insert the citation. Okay, and again, oops. Now, if I go back to the analysis screen, you'll see that the cross here shows up in blue. If I hover over the cross, a pop-up screen will show me what the citation is. And when I generate a proof report, Evidentia will insert this citation in line with all the other citations for the other information that we've referenced in this proof. So it just kind of inserts this information right between the citation for this vital record and for the 1810 US Census. So I like to use that for basically documenting things that are not common knowledge so that people don't have to take my word for it. And that, other than the fact that I've misspelled Gilmanton, is my analysis for that piece of evidence. And you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, right near the scroll bar, that this check mark has gone green. What that indicates to me is that as far as Evidentia is concerned, this part of my research for this record is done. Now, it doesn't evaluate that information for correctness or thoroughness, but it is indicating that it's done. When all of the check marks are green, that means I've documented and I've analyzed all the information and evidence available to me, and then I can write my conclusion. If right now I click on the conclusion box, you'll see that the conclusion box is surrounded in red. And what that basically means is it's locked. If I try to write something in the summary conclusion box or try to play with the other controls, Evidentia will not let me. And the reason is Evidentia is inviting you to do all your analysis and doesn't want you to jump to conclusions. Now, if you find that annoying and you want to write conclusions along the way, you can go to Settings, General Settings, and there's an option here for Allow Conclusion Edits when missing analysis. If I select Done on that, and now I click on Conclusion, you can see that the box has gone green, and I can write something in the box if I want to. Oops. I don't want to write anything in the box, so I'm going to exit out for now. I'm going to reset my lock. But that's what's going on there, and that's the purpose of the green check marks. All right, so let's look at the 1810 U.S. Census. It tells us that the household of David Thompson includes one male between 10 and 15 years of age. So it's possible that Daniel P. Thompson, who I believe was the second or third son of David, it's possible that he was sent away to live with relatives. It's possible that he had died. We know he didn't in this case. So it's possible that this particular reference in the 1810 census doesn't tell us anything about Daniel Page Thompson. So I need to capture that as a caveat to my analysis. But in the meantime, it is consistent with what we're going to find in the rest of the records. So I'm going to capture it as that. I think this is Daniel that it's talking about. I think his brothers were older and younger. So I'm going to capture that accordingly. Let's move on to the 1820 census. So Daniel doesn't show up in the 1820 census for David Thompson. And in fact, I could capture that as negative evidence as well, and probably should. He also, there is a reference to a Daniel Thompson in the 1820 census, but Daniel is not of the right age to have been the head of household, especially given the ages of other people in that household. Nor is there a white male listed between the age of 16 and 25. And remember, we would have expected our Daniel to be about 22 years of age. It's interesting that the person listed here is not listed as Daniel P., and I'll talk about that in a moment. This provides no evidence, but we need to at least account for it so that people know, hey, how come there's no 1820 census information? We need to account for that because otherwise people could call us out on our analysis. 1830 census. Now, I could reference the fact that how do I know that this is my Daniel? I'm going to do that in the 18. You're going to see me kind of repeat my analysis over time. I don't know why I keep trying to correct my spelling after telling you I wasn't going to do that. Ooh. Okay. 1840 census tells us DP. I'm just going to write the same thing. 1850 does the same thing. What I'm going to do is augment this. It also helps answer the question. How do you know this is your Daniel P. Thompson? Based on known marriage information. It provides direct evidence, but you always need to ask yourself, how do I know this is my person of interest and not just some random person who happened to live in this town, happened to be about the same age? And believe me, there are a lot of Daniel Thompsons around the same age as my ancestor Daniel. And in this particular case, it's the fact that it's Daniel P., not enough by itself, but also who he's living with. And I have evidence that he married Fanny Richardson. I would again go up here and capture why I feel strongly about that, but I don't believe I've actually done a proof of his marriage to Fanny. I have not. So I probably want to do that and include it in that case as a reference if I wanted to be totally thorough. Sometimes that can be circular, but this is what helps me answer the question that this Daniel Page Thompson or Daniel P. Thompson is being tracked through the census from 1830 to 1850. This about when he was 51, that he was born in New Hampshire. This supports the previous argument about his childhood home. I'm going to pick up some speed here. By itself, it's not compelling. If I expand on this, you'll see that this was an authored work. And in fact, if I go look at that record, you'll see that it's a one-liner and that it's really about Susanna Richardson, that Daniel Page Thompson was only mentioned because he happened to marry her. So that would create this as kind of weaker information. The thing that makes it so, and it was secondary information, obviously the author had secondary information about that, but this book was also written before Daniel Page Thompson died. So it was, can't think of the word right now, this particular piece of information happened while the couple was alive and living in Woburn. So that provides a little more strength to that argument. And now, Vital Records claims that Daniel P. Thompson died in 1852. I know, typo. Pick up speed, Ed. Let me collapse this again. And then the last piece of evidence is this article in the Boston Post. We've completed our analysis. All of my check marks are green, and we're about ready to start our summary conclusion. Now, let me say a few things about this. This was not a thorough analysis. Okay, there are certain records that one would expect to find that would provide more evidence about his residence and about other parts of his life. For example, I didn't check any church records, and him being a prominent citizen of the town of Woburn, you would expect that he probably went to church. I have not checked any land records. I have not checked any probate records. Actually, I did check a probate record. And what the probate record said is that Daniel died intestate, that is without a will, and that Fanny was assigned as the executress of that will, and that at the time of his death, Daniel owned property worth $1,200, which in today's dollars would be about $40,000. At the same time, that is not a small amount of property to be owned. That would strengthen the argument, again, that he lived in Woburn. All right, you'll see here that the review box on the right-hand side is selected. That is because I've not written my conclusion yet. So there's a couple different ways. You can write your conclusion however makes sense to you. These are some guidelines that I would suggest. Number one, document your conclusion, your final analysis conclusion, at the very top of your conclusion summary. In other words, document the conclusion first. And then in the following paragraphs, address any questions that might have arisen during your research, address any conflicting evidence, basically anticipate how people might attack your particular argument. But start your very first sentence as if you were 100% sure, even if you're not, because you can qualify in the following paragraphs. There's two different ways I usually start my summary conclusion. If I believe I've been very thorough, I will start with the classic, a thorough and exhaustive analysis of the evidence supports the conclusion that Daniel H. Thompson lived in Woburn most of his life. Okay, so the key here is, if I've been thorough and exhaustive, I'll say that I've been thorough and exhausting. Yes, it was exhausting too. I'll start it with the phrase, a thorough and exhaustive analysis, or a thorough and exhaustive search. And the reason I would choose that particular language is because it meets the criteria for the genealogical proof standard. Now, I've not been thorough and exhaustive in this particular research because of the records that a typical genealogist would have expected to have researched before they reached a final conclusion. So I'm not going to say a thorough and exhaustive analysis. I'm going to say that current evidence supports the conclusion that Daniel Page Thompson lived in Woburn most of his life. The evidence supports that Daniel started his life in 1898 in what is now Guilford, New Hampshire, and may have lived there at least through age 12. Again, this could be argued with. I'm going to write it down as the conclusion, but it's weak. I know that it's weak. I might even say that it's weak in the argument itself. I'm going to double click this. At least through age 12. Daniel does not appear in any records again until 1830, when he appears in the census as a resident of Woburn, Mass. Until he died in 1852. The gap between 1810, when Daniel was 12, and 1830, when he was 32, is yet to be filled. It is likely he was a boarder in another home, perhaps working a farm, and would not have appeared in any census by name. And that's my conclusion. We can argue about it if you like, but that's where I'm putting my stake in the ground for now. So let me say done there, and you'll see that it's all populated. Now, the summary conclusion box, your conclusion can be one sentence. Obviously, I'm tracing Daniel Page over a lifetime, so that wouldn't be appropriate here. It could be one paragraph, it could be 3 paragraphs, it could be 3 pages. Evidentia will support however deep you want to go, or you could export this to a file and import it into Word and continue your analysis there. Let's talk about some of these other fields. Number 1, these boxes. I'm going to uncheck the review box because I think I've got a solid conclusion here. I think it's relatively conclusive, but I'm going to tag it as inconclusive because of the missing years. If I was trying to answer a research question and the evidence disproved the question, I can select disproven here. So I could select the disproven box. And what that tells me, I mean, sometimes you're going to have a research question, and I might have looked at all this evidence and said, you know what, this isn't my Daniel Page Thompson. And I might pick the fact where he lived doesn't make sense because negative evidence is harder to prove, but I could tag it as disproven. And that would tell me I've got more research to do about a different Daniel P. Thompson. This isn't mine. If I want to export this into a GEDCOM, I can populate the GEDCOM fields with dates. I'm going to say between 1830 and 1852. And the residence was Woburn, Mass. And then I've done my calculations. Now, I might have, especially since I'm inconclusive, what do I want to do next? Well, I'm going to open up the notes screen and document what I want to do next. Research church records. I'm just going to put the same thing in the body. Create a new one. Research land records. Let's see if it'll let me put an empty. Yep, a new one. Research probate records. And I'm going to document the outstanding question is, why did Daniel leave New Hampshire? And why did Daniel choose Woburn? So those are kind of my outstanding questions. Now to finish things off, I'm going to open up a proof report, which is going to be a PDF, so it takes a little bit of time to open. And we see now that the proof report includes our summary at the top. It includes under itemized findings that there were 10 assertions from 8 sources were considered in evaluating this information. And then it's going to go through source by source, telling us our classifications of the information and evidence, and including our analysis. If we look at that 1810 census, remember that birth record that let's see. Oh, it's missing the, where's my, under recommendations for continuing. Oh, that's not good. Instead of showing me my 5 separate records, it uses the same title over and over again. That's a program bug I'm going to have to fix. Apologize for that. And then at the bottom are all of my footnotes. You'll see here number 2 is the one for my proof, and it put undefined as the title. So that's another bug in the program that I'm going to have to fix. Remember when I added that footnote in the analysis itself, and that was record number 2, and it did not capture the title correctly. So I'm going to have to fix that. But it is a nice feature that includes actually your proofs as citations for your proofs in your argument, so that you don't have to argue the same things over and over again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we analyze our evidence in Evidentia.